are thinking about entrepreneurship and you listen to like modern rhetoric or even people in your close circles, like everyone's always counting on Black people's businesses to fail. And it's not from a, standpoint of, entrepreneurship, everybody's not going to make it. But it's like, why do we say that? Because what's the alternative? Of noise around. Okay, first of all, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. I know I need to do better with like getting my intro, but I just took a nap because mental gymnastics is a bit exhausting, and sometimes you'll find yourself needing one of those, So now I'm on my late night tip. I have so many books to read. Like, I'm actually at this point where I'm procrastinating because I have so many books to read, and then I have another on the way. How have I scheduled time to read? I really haven't, to be honest. Like, I really haven't been prioritizing my reading. Although I'm getting ready to finish up Between the World and Me, I was able to read some more shorter books throughout this month because, well, I just think about my schedule and my time. Yeah, it really doesn't exist when you have like work and school and other liabilities. But I have been trying to get better with my time management. And it sounds like I'm about to drop an ad. Maybe one day. I don't know. But first of all, let's go ahead and congratulate to the 4,000 listeners because that's pretty dope. I did this like by myself. For a long time, I wasn't really sure what Renaissance Room was going to be. And for a long time, I kind of was like dabbling in between what I wanted to say, what I didn't want to say, which brings me to the whole purpose of this episode. So a lot of people are critiquing Black conservatives. And I made a YouTube video kind of touching on a different aspect of this. When you start talking about like elegant living, you start talking about sophistication, you start talking about like living of a higher standard outside of the stereotypical norms that is Blackness, I think that that's where we get the conservative. And I think the conservative is one who tries to find their way from not being this total byproduct of like a Black stereotype, you know what I mean? But also being evidently Black and American and in America, So I think anytime you kind of like ascribe to a different standard of living, you're then kind of like cast away. Now, this is a tricky thing because I think in one part, you are American, right? Like Black people are American. And I love, Jet magazines. I talked to you guys about that, like the body of work that I have in regards to like previous Jet magazines from the 60s and the 70s and so forth. But there's always been beautiful Black women who carry themselves in like very sophisticated ways. It's not just style, but we know that fashion is a really big thing in the African American community. So we know that, fashion is a politic. So I think in part to me, it sometimes feels like there is a little bit of miseducation in terms of, quote unquote, the Black middle class, I guess you could say, or even the upper class, right? In terms of like just carrying yourself and being educated and being sophisticated. I think where we get lost, right? And where it gets lost on us is the whole thing about entrepreneurship, right? You talk to people today and you start talking about entrepreneurship. And I don't think it's from the standpoint of like, oh, small businesses fail because, money or whatever the case may be. But a lot of Black people are discouraged from pursuing entrepreneurship. Like it's not really anything that anybody really believes in, right? We don't really have the funding, right? Collectively, like you can't just call your aunt and get that 5,000 opposed to like your white counterparts, So, there's a completely different element in terms of entrepreneurship, but it's crazy that we're really discouraged from entrepreneurship. And I think that that's kind of what breeds this sort of like radical conservative, right? I think that it actually takes a little bit of time for Black people to kind of step out on faith and trust themselves and trust God in their ability to really become like an entrepreneur, right? Whether that's pursuing their art. I know for me, there were a lot of hurdles that were placed in my way outside of like self-doubt. I didn't really have a business foundation. And I think as much as you want to be like, I want to start this business, I want to do what it is I want to do, I 100% believe in preparation if you're going to have longevity. So, there's one aspect of it, and I'm still very young. Like we're on the road. Okay. We're on the road. We're coasting. We're on a one track. Well, I was trying to say that and try to be funny, but I'm serious. We're on a one-way train to Georgia, midnight train to Georgia. So first of all, I think in terms of entrepreneurship, right? I don't think that entrepreneurship the skills needed, the education needed in terms of like how to really have a well-functioning business. I don't think that that is something that is taught in widespread, right? I understand it is something that you just kind of have to start, but I think we start talking about like legalities and, you know, we know some of the best businesses, like I mentioned Jet and Ebony Magazine, right? Like being a Black-owned business, thriving in Chicago, right? The heartbeat of, you know, Black media, eventually filing bankruptcy, right? So it's like a lot of times I think in part we are a little bit discouraged in regards to entrepreneurship because we need the skills, right? I don't think there's ever anything wrong with like getting a business certificate or taking some business classes or doing whatever you got to do just to make sure that your ship is well oiled and you're going to be able to smooth sail. You know, entrepreneurship has a lot of hiccups. I think the more information you have going into it, depending on the type of business, depending on like the level of severity, I think it's different. You know, I would say that because I'm someone who gears more towards like product-based businesses, service-based businesses, you know, consulting, kind of like working with others type businesses, what I needed was a more solid foundation, right? I don't think that everyone's kind of starting off with like a different type of idea where you don't really need that. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of businesses where you can just kind of like start like, you know, maybe if it's like food or something like that, like it's just a little bit different. I don't know too much about a lot of different industries, so I'm not really going to speak on that. I could be complicating it, but I know I'm not. Right? I think for me, when I think about business, I know I want something that there's longevity, right? I don't want to have this scarcity mindset to where it's like, okay, I'm opening up the doors today and I'm shutting them down tomorrow because I didn't have money to pay this and I didn't have money to pay that. And then in entrepreneurship, there's always just a lot of different tools and things that you need, you know? So I think for me, it's like, if you really want to be able to grow in business and you really want to be able to have a successful business, try to set a really good foundation for your business, right? And I'm saying all this to say, I think the reason why we have so many radical Black conservatives who say that they are not pro-Black, and honestly, I thought that I was one of those people, right? I didn't think that there was another way. And I think this is why I have so much compassion for Black conservatives, because, you know, if you're educated, you go to college, you do all the right things, you find yourself in these positions, you know, you got the job or whatever the case may be, it's easy to find yourself in that space. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a means of survival. You know what I mean? And you start looking at, you know, certain things and you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? So I think for me, I'm always going to have a little bit of compassion for Black conservatives. However, you know, we start talking about like Mrs. Owens. I always say this. I think Candace is in a very vulnerable position. Like, I think this is the thing too, right? So it's like, if you're not really graced to kind of get out of that mindset and realize that, hey, look, I don't have to, you know, play against my people. I don't have to, you know, kind of be put in this cage, right? I can actually have a business where I can be self-expressive and I can make my own decisions and I can work with clients or I can do whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's my art or whatever. I know I always talk about creativity because I'm Black and gifted. So I know that there are other Black and gifted people who just definitely are going to find this podcast like inevitably. But, you know, there are other ways to make money. And it's like, well, if you don't know that, right, then it's like you're going to find yourself way off the deep end. So we know Mrs. Owens is a little bit older, you know, she's a little bit older than the girls. And so I think for me, I have so much compassion for her. I really do. Like, I really feel like, you know, she's very vulnerable, you know, like when you go off on the deep end and you're like way deep in it and like, you know what I mean? Like, and such as Candace Owens, it's like, I don't know. That's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in as a Black woman. And, you know, you don't have family, you don't have, you know, and I think for me, I hear the lifelines, you know, when she references like, oh, maybe Cardi B isn't so bad. Or she'll say something like, you know, this is why I like Jay-Z. You know, I hear the lifeline, like, but I do think that, you know, in regards to rappers, entertainers, Black conservatives, you got to be careful, you know, going against your people, you know what I mean? Like, and you don't have to look at it in terms of like such a tribal level of seriousness, but it's like, you know, you do have to kind of be accountable for your actions. And so I think that for Mrs. Owens, I think she's very vulnerable. I think that's a very vulnerable position to be in, you know, to be surrounded by white people who are racist, you know what I mean? Like, and you have all white friends and you're the only Black person, you know what I mean? And they're making comments, they're saying things. Now you're out here saying things, believing things. And I mean, that's just a very vulnerable position. And now you're like knee deep in it. You know what I mean? Like that's a very vulnerable place to be. So it's like, I actually have a lot of compassion for Candace Owens. I really do. Like I really feel sorry for her, to be honest. Like that's gotta suck. You know, I just think about like, I couldn't imagine. So anyway, This is just kind of like a short brief on Black conservatives, why I think it happens. I think, again, it's really just a means of survival. I think for a lot of people, you go to school, you do the right thing. Of course, when we talk about like Black conservatives, low key, I kind of feel like we're talking about millennials. But like I said, because I felt like I was someone who was considered someone like Black and conservative. And I guess maybe I low key still am, but I don't know. I talk to my friends. They know my works. They say you're absolutely not conservative. So I don't know. I mean, I don't say that like, oh, I'm not conservative, but I don't know. To me, it's like I'm pretty reserved. So, I would say so. Like, I used to think conservative outside of like politics. I just thought it was just a matter of like being reserved with your life, with yourself, you know what I mean? Certain things. Like, I feel like when we talk about my art, my writing, my body of work in terms of like this podcast and, my work within the community, I would say that that's pretty reserved, I would say, but, I guess it's not. I guess if I'm a Black woman and I'm advocating on behalf of Black people and I'm a Black activist, so to speak, then I can't be conservative. Okay, somebody educate me about politics. I didn't really get into that. I think to be Black, that is your politic. Like, you can't get away from it, Like, I don't know. Like, it's so crazy, you guys, because I was sitting here thinking to myself about the experiences I've had. And I shared this, on my podcast, on the episode I did about Black shame, just how, for a long time, like, I really thought differently about myself. And so I really started having experiences like as a Black woman, and I was realizing how I was perceived, and it wasn't how I saw myself. And I realized that those perceptions was entirely controlled by my Black body, and I wrote a poem about that. It was really deep, and it touched a lot of people on Medium. Just what it's like to have wisdom, but to be in a Black body, and how, you're really not seen in that way, So I think that I've had a lot of intimate moments here lately where I was realizing that, because like I said, Black is like, it's not a thing right now. You know what I mean? It's not a thing right now. Black beauty's not really a thing, and so you talk about like that invisibility. And for me, I don't think that it's a matter of ageism, right? Like, I don't think ageism is playing a role, because I don't think my attention is solely centered on romantic relationships or attention from, men. But it's just more so realizing just like the weightiness of the weightiness of all the experiences that I've had, and like it coming full circle, and me realizing like, oh wow, you know what I mean? That was because I was Black. You know what I mean? Because I never saw myself as like less than. I always felt like, okay, I'm enough. I'm qualified. I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't really into, that's why I say like that. I think that podcast episode was so essential, because where we are today, Black self-esteem, it's like there's an attack on how we see ourselves. I was listening to, I happened to I followed a journalist. She was a writer on Instagram, and she had posted like one of the, female rappers or whatever. So I clicked on the page, and there was like a recent song that she put out, and it was like, the song was just so degrading, and it was like coming from a woman. And I was like, wow, and so I realized that like, it's so crazy how what you listen to influences so much of like, you know what I mean? How you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself, and so forth. And so I think when you don't have that, like that understanding of like who you are, you can really find yourself in that space. And I do think that's why we have a lot of division in sisterhood, and not just within sisterhood, but within the Black community in general, like that pride, you know what I mean? Because it's really, music is spiritual, it really is. So anyway, I think Black conservatives are conservative, and they may not put their pro-Blackness up front. One, you have to understand that the work of Black history and educating yourself in regards to Black history is your own personal work, but it's something in which a lot of people have not got on the road, and that's regardless of age. Like, there's a lot of time that has to be put into studying who you are and like learning about your history, and it's endless, right? I mean, we literally were born and raised in a country that has been so intentional in keeping us away from that, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I mentioned the increase in book prices. Like, I don't think this is a matter of inflation, right? But I spoke about this, as someone, avid reader, lover of books have gone up like a lot. So I don't find that to be coincidental, right? But yeah, so I think that there comes a point in time where a lot of Black conservatives will eventually kind of start doing that work and realizing like, okay, but I do think for a lot of people, it is a means of survival. And I don't think that we should fault them entirely. And the reason why I say that is because, people got to pay their bills. I think regardless, it's like the bills have to get paid. Does that have to be based on does that need to be an excuse to, exploit your community? No. But, I do think that we have to, for me at least, I have compassion for Black conservatives because I understand, and even for myself, it wasn't until I really kind of started to educate myself, believe in myself, most importantly, and really develop my relationship with God, that I realized that I could triumph, I could become successful, and I could be my own employer. Like I never, like you talk about it, but like, you know what I mean? When you're on that journey, when you're doing that work, like, that seems like a long, it's like a very long way from where you're at, and like I said, it depends on your business. I think, again, we see a lot of entrepreneurs, they're saying like, just get started, which again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But from what I found with entrepreneurship, you're going to need some money. Okay. You may not need a lot of money, but you need to set a little budget aside because real talk, you're going to need some cash. Okay. Like you're not going to be able to just start a business based on nothing, and like I said, it depends on the business. I know, I just met a young woman who has a makeup business, and she doesn't sell products, but she does makeup, and she teaches classes where you can bring your own makeup and she'll teach you how to do it. I mean, she's fabulous. I actually met her when I was going to look, because I'm looking at some makeup, girl. I'm looking for a new look. And maybe we'll talk about some more lighthearted things on this podcast, but right now it's time for education. Okay. So anyway, I'm sure that business was, that may be a great place to start, but I also know that, she does have a studio space, right? So it's like, again, there's money that has to go into the business. I think if you are, if you have a job, right, that can fund your business, and that's like the best thing. But, for a lot of us, we're stacking and saving. So that's real, so don't ever feel like you got to just jump off the porch. It's absolutely okay to have a plan. It's absolutely, and it's not really a matter of procrastination. Like when we talk about having a plan, I'm all about taking the steps that you need to create the business that you want. For me, as my vision has come full circle, as I've continued to press forward and lean into my faith and move forward with, my entrepreneurial journey, right? Like figuring out what is the next step as an artist, as a writer, right? Like for a very long time, I was like, I'm an artist. Like y'all know, listening to previous episodes, I'm like, I am an artist. Okay. I am not an entrepreneur. Like I'm just an artist. I didn't really want to take it seriously because I didn't have the skills. And I think that that's one thing too. Like you got to be real with yourself in regards to where you are, So, and, so there's that, but I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, I've seen a lot of Black conservatives break out of corporate and speak out about their experiences. So it's definitely not lost on me. I completely understand. And I always say, like, when you talk about the world of academia and sending your children to school, things like that, you're really in an interesting place. You know what I mean? It's a very tough place to be, because it's like, okay, do we send our kids to this school for, better opportunities, better, resources and impossible, potential outlooks for college? Or, do we consider the fact that they are going to face racial discrimination? They are going to come out with, couple stains on them, you know what I mean, from going into these institutions. Like, what do we do in that case? So I think when you start talking about like education, you start talking about being in America, you start talking about it being, its foundation is capitalism, right? Like that's a lot to consider. So I have compassion for the Black conservatives. However we make our choices, I understand that. I really do. But I do think that once you get to that place where you're like, okay, I can actually create something for myself, right? And I can have my own business, and it is possible for me. I do think that you will have a different attitude. And when I think about conservatives, I would say maybe it's more so like I don't want to, it's almost like concealing, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like concealing. And so I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, and I don't think that everybody always has to bring their work out on the forefront, but I guess too, when we talk about conservatives, a lot of people are always leaning towards Black people who talk about the issues that are within the community, which, I have been that Black conservative. I've said it. I have. And the reason why I'm not going to retract my statements, I said what I said, is because I just feel like that really needs to, like, we really do got to look in the mirror. Like, I'm out here, I'm in the community centers, I'm doing the work, and it's like, I got the black teachers looking at me when I'm trying to roll the clip. You know what I mean? When I'm trying to play the program about, you know what I mean? And the black teachers looking at me like I'm crazy when I'm telling, the young girls, hey, listen, I know y'all like Nicki, but Nicki ain't where it's at. You know what I mean? Nicki's not what's happening. So it's just like, how do you navigate those waters? How can we navigate those waters in the community when we know that this is a real thing? I remember when I lived in a city, when I stayed on, when I lived in a city, and, I'm in the city, and, it's summertime, and, there's young girls walking down the street, and it's like, they're dressed like literally it was crazy. Like what I'm seeing, I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. So it's like, when you are someone who you're in your community real time, and you actually see how rap music and supposed quote unquote like anti-blackness is actually like playing out to the children's demise, yeah, you're probably not going to really stand for certain things, And again, I think too, like when you start talking about this monolithic view of girlhood, right? For black girls, you have to understand that it's not that we have a problem with black entertainers, black female entertainers. It's not that I think anytime we critique the art and we talk about how it's impacting the youth, people always kind of just want to jump straight to you know what I mean? And it's not an attack on the person. Like I really like Megan Thee Stallion. I do. She seems like a really nice woman. You know what I mean? Like she seems like, but it's just like when you start realizing how like this type of attitude and this stuff is influencing young girls, it's a problem, right? You say, okay, well, the parents aren't talking to them. Okay, well, hey, listen, you know what I mean? Which way you want to come at this? You know what I mean? Because it's a lot of, it's multifaceted. You know what I mean? We can come at this from a lot of different perspectives, but it's like, you can't possibly tell me that it's not having an impact on our kids, So it's like, I don't really know how to navigate that. And then you think about a lot of, as much as we don't want to admit it, but not every young black girl is like that. I know for me growing up, I wasn't like that. I think about NPR Code Switch. They did a podcast with Taylor Swift, and they were just talking about how, Taylor's at this place now. She's got this large platform. She's not really using it to address the girlhood experiences of any other groups of women except for white women. And I had a little pushback for that because, one, Taylor Swift is a white woman. I really don't like when we try to force people to represent or share their platforms with other minorities, because I don't really know how we expect them to do that. Like, I don't think that if Taylor Swift was to come out and try to advocate on behalf of young black girls or, young Hispanic girls, I don't see that landing well. She has no relation. She has no, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't really like when we try to force that. And then I don't really appreciate how we're holding Taylor to that standard, but we're not holding artists such as like Megan Thee Stallion or any other, you know what I mean? Any other black, I don't really know any Hispanic artists, so, forgive me, but we're not holding any other black artist, black female entertainer to that same standard, right? Like, because to be honest, they speak to the youth, they speak to young girls, and what exactly are they representing in terms of their girlhood, right? The same hypersexuality that we're trying to get them away from, right? We're trying to unravel that. We're trying to, you know what I mean? So it's just like, why? Like, I'm not really here for the Taylor slander. Okay. I'm just not, you know what I mean? For me, it's so crazy growing up. Obviously, you're aware of race. I was aware Taylor Swift was a white girl. And I know this is going to sound like a bit conservative, but, for me, it was like, I related to the lyrics because it was like, I was that girl. I was the, hey, you're upstairs with your girlfriend. She's upset. She's going up about something that you said. You know what I mean? For me, I was that, I wasn't that black girl that was like overtly sexual. You know what I mean? I was very slim. And I was in my books. I was into academia. So it's just like, I didn't really relate to that. And I think about all the other young black girls who may not fit into, maybe like a stereotype of like a nerd, but you think about that they do exist. You know what I mean? And so you have to realize that like so much of our attention always goes to, this idea of the black girl being so hypersexual, this idea of the black girl being so, you know what I mean? And it's crazy because in that podcast, they actually talked about how young black girls are seen as more sexual. They're seen as more like they're stereotyped into basically they were just saying that, like, when people perceive young Black girls, they think that, you know, we know more about sex than we actually do, and we're actually seen as like adult women. You know, I think they said by the ages of like 14. So it's really sad, you know what I mean? And I remember working with like 7th graders and just, you know, some of the young women, and just kind of like this really grown type of attitude that these young girls had, like, I know it all, lady, you don't know, you know what I mean? And it's not really like the sass that comes with every little girl. Like, I think every girl child is sassy, you know what I mean? But you just start to think about how Black entertainers, Black female entertainers specifically, really hold up this really fast life in terms of Black women and like Black girls and girlhood. Like, we don't get that, you know, sweet Taylor Swift type, you know what I mean? And I know you guys, I hate to compare it to a white woman. Like, I know I'm not doing that thing where I'm comparing our culture to white women. So that's not what I'm doing. But hear me out. Like, really think about this. You know what I mean? Like, so when you think about our girlhood and who represents our girlhood, it's very narrow and it's always seen as sexual, right? That's the thing, right? So it's like when you have young Black girls who don't know anything about that, right? Because they're children. You know what I mean? Like, how do we navigate these waters? And here you are, you know, if you are someone who works within your community or you work with the youth and you're like, hey, listen, I'm not saying Nicki Minaj is a bad person. You know what I mean? I'm not negating the fact that you may be, you know what I mean, admiring her success as a supposed Black woman. But I know that the truth is like, that's not the case. You know what I mean? And so it's like when you have that and you have other community leaders, right, Black women combating with you, you know, like, well, I think that Nicki Minaj is a great role model. And it's just like, well, where do we go from here? You know what I mean? And so I just think that what that creates is almost like a siloing of Black girlhood. I think that creates almost like a bullying, right? Like, because then other Black girls are what? They're considered quote unquote lame. You know, for me, I was considered like a lame, right? And so it's like you start to create this pressure, right? Then there's the Black peer group, okay? We know from Dr. Kunjufu, right? And this is how we get like teen pregnancy. And this is how we get, you know, all these things, all these unwanted experiences because of the presentation. Now, that's not to say, again, that this is not a matter of control or, you know what I mean? I'm not really here I don't want to lean too far into that. I'm just talking about just the basis here in terms of like what we mean when we defend anti-Blackness. You know what I mean? Like, what are we really defending? You know, I think that what we really should be sticking up for is our ability to have a presence, our ability to be human, and our ability to exist, you know what I mean, in different modalities, and to really be humane. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Black people really can only exist in one monolith. And so I think for a lot of conservatives, in an attempt to escape this very raunchy, stereotypical ideal, I think a lot of them go a little bit off the deep end, you know? So I'm just saying, hey, we should have a little compassion because I understand. And I think for a lot of Black conservatives who find themselves in a space where they're like, hey, look, you know, I'm coming out of this, right? I'm leaving this corporate job. I want to share the experiences I've had, you know, or whatever. And they find entrepreneurship and they realize like, okay, yeah, I can be my own employer. I don't necessarily have to be silenced or pigeonholed in this space where I can't speak about my community or I can't speak about the things that matter to me. So a lot to unpack in this episode. I know you got something from it. And I just want to thank you all so much for listening. Be sure to check out my website, JennaLeslie.com, to buy my poetry book, Seasons. It's very inspirational. It's a little bit of a journey of me becoming a writer and how I got here. So peace.